The Blue Jackets may have the best prospect pool in the NHL, and Jarmo Kekalainen may possibly be a listener of this show. That's coming up for you today on Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I'm your host, Hayden Houshorn. With me is my co-host, Jay Foster. Before we get going, we want to thank you for making this your first listen every day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available wherever you get your podcast, YouTube, and the SiriusXM app. Jay and I are under the belief that Jarmo listens to the show because that is quite literally the only way he would have known to sign Aaron Dell. That's a joke, of course. But at the beginning of goalie reviews this offseason, Jay, you brought up Aaron Dell as a possible free agency signing. It looks like the Blue Jackets have offered him a tryout. They also offered tryouts to 26-year-old defenseman Nicholas Milosh and 24-year-old center Nate Schnarr. But, Jay, you're the beer league goaltender. Your fiance is a big Sharks fan, so your opinion on Aaron Dell a lot more valid than mine, so I'll let you get yours out in a second. All I'll lead you with is this. I love when Jarmo signs guys to a tryout. It makes me feel, as a Blue Jackets fan, that he's doing a full sweep of anybody in the entire hockey player pool if they could be good in the NHL. So I like when Jarmo's making moves like this. Jay, what did you think of the Jackets bringing in Aaron Dell to camp at the end of September here in a month?
Yeah, I really like the Aaron Dell PTO. I was kind of joking, oh yeah, Aaron Dell will be a really good option to pick up. Obviously, it's a PTO. Nothing is nothing is set in stone. But this feels a lot more likely to be a PTO and then a signing than the other two guys. The other two guys might get an AHL deal. I don't expect them to be impact players, even for the Monsters this season. So Aaron Dell is really the exciting piece here. I watched him a decent amount this season with the San Jose Barracuda in the AHL, where he was really good for them and really kind of kept them in a lot of games, even when, the team wasn't very good. So he's pretty experienced at that. Only played 4 NHL games last season, but had, I believe, a .913 save percentage, despite the fact that he didn't win a single one of those games, which, again, it sounds familiar, right? He's a little bit older. He is, let me just double check. I want
34.
34. Yes, he's 34 years old. He's been around in the NHL at least since the 2015-2016 season. Has kind of bounced around a little bit, spent some time with the Sharks, went to New Jersey, went to Buffalo, went back to the Sharks for a season, and I thought he would be a really good piece to pick up. You get a little bit of goalie insurance. He's a guy that can hang out in the minor league, give some veteran leadership down there. He's a guy that you can call up if you need him to be called up. If, Elvis is injured, or if you want to send Tarasov down for a couple of starts to get him some more ice time in Cleveland, you can do that. You call Dell up. He's fine backing up. He's probably fine starting. Of course, all of this kind of hinges on, does he get a contract? But it's always validating when you're just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and you're like, hey, this dude would be a great option for the team. And then the team is like, yes, we agree. We're going to go out and sign him. So do I think Jarmo is listening to Locked On Blue Jackets? No, but I do feel like we had kind of some of the same thoughts, which is always kind of validating as a hockey media adjacent person, let's say.
Jarmo, if you are listening, you can feel free to listen to Jay as much as you want. Don't listen to me, because if you listen to me, you'd have Nick Schmaltz instead of Adam Fantilli right now. So keep that in the back of your head. Don't listen to Hayden, listen to Jay. I completely agree. I think we opened up our season reviews on goalies admitting that the depth is going to need some help. Or it's a little bit questionable, to say the least. Losing Korpisalo was huge for that room in a negative way. So giving a guy like Aaron Dell the chance to make his way onto the team is huge. I kind of wish they would just sign him, because it makes me feel like just giving guys tryouts that doesn't usually lead to signings. I feel like that's usually the case. But if there is one position that he can absolutely get signed onto the team from, it's goalie, because the Blue Jackets need help there. We've talked about that. You're absolutely right. He could play as a starter. He could play as a backup. We know Elvis sometimes needs to rely on backups for, injuries. Any starter needs to rely on backups. And we don't know what Tarasov is going to look like this year. We're hoping it's more of the same, but always good to have somebody. He would be the oldest guy in the room, and 34 is not even that old for a goalie. I feel like, goalies are playing into their late 30s nowadays, it seems like. But he has a 500 record in 130 games started. He is 50-50 and 13, which I don't ask me how that math works. He started 106 games. I'm sorry. And he's 50-50 and 13. Again, still don't know how that math works. But so yeah, this guy, he has a lot of experience. I think it would be very good to bring him in, and I'm really excited that he's got a professional tryout. It gives me a reason as a fan to want to go watch some of the action at the Ice House coming up in a month, because they did that. They've been doing that the last couple years, opening the doors for people to come in. So yeah, I'm excited about this guy. But anything else on these other two guys? I know the Milosh, Nicholas Milosh played with the Barracuda a little bit. He's bounced around the AHL quite a bit, but he's a bigger defenseman, 6'3", so you got some good size there. Maybe he could do something. I don't know. I mean, I feel like the Blue Jackets are so stacked in their prospect pool at the defense position, which we're going to talk about later. But did you take anything worth noting from the other two guys that the Blue Jackets are bringing in for this camp?
Not really. I think, like I said, kind of at the beginning, I think they're both probably, if they get signed, which I'm not banking on it, I think they're probably monsters. Natchnar has not made his NHL debut yet at the age of 24, which obviously things can change. Look at Justin Danforth. But as of right now, his career high is in AHL points is 26 points in 43 games. And that's as high as he's gotten in his 4 years since turning pro, excuse me. He had 102 points in 65 games in his final season with the Guelph Storm, but his game, I don't think, was super translatable to the AHL or even the NHL. Former third-round pick by the Coyotes, but yeah, I'm not. This is we don't have a ton of centers for the Monsters. Let's see what this guy's like. Similar deal for the defense, except the Monsters and the Blue Jackets both have a lot of defensemen. So again, this kind of feels like hey, we'll see how this kid goes. Again, not expecting a ton from this guy. Former second-round pick from 2015, has played a handful of NHL games. He played 50 for the Sharks a couple of seasons ago, but I do not remember him. So, that doesn't sound, that's not great if he played 2 seasons ago on the Sharks and I don't remember him, because that was the time I was kind of watching the Sharks. So, Aaron Dell, to me, is the PTO to keep an eye on. I would be very surprised if they did not offer him a contract at the end of training camp.
That would be big. All right, we're going to do something completely different next. You're going to hear a segment from Locked On NHL Prospects, hosted by Hadi and Sebastian. That's coming up for you guys next here on Locked On Blue Jackets. Get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket and from YouTube and YouTube TV. That's a great deal right there. Now is the best time to join FanDuel, the app that's easy to use, and you can bet on everything from spreads, player props, over-unders on games, over-unders on passing yards, just all kinds of fun things. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with an offer you don't want to miss. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL.
Alrighty, so moving on to our final team in the top 32 breakdown of the NHL's prospect polls. We finally round things up with team number 1, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, the Blue Jackets have added so many interesting pieces in the last couple of years. The most promising of which, in my opinion, would be Adam Fantilli. I mean, David Jiricek is in that conversation, but Fantilli, for me, is a clear notch ahead of him in terms of quality and upside overall. What are they getting out of Fantilli, and what makes him such a promising, almost plug-and-play player?
Fantilli is an exceptionally talented prospect. This is the guy who was unquestionably the best player in college hockey last season in his draft year, which is not something we've said since Jack Eichel.
Yeah.
And I think there are quite a few comparables between those two players. And Fantilli is a true power forward. He plays with exceptional skill. He is very creative and is never afraid of trying things. He tries things constantly on the ice, perhaps to a fault. I think he's going to have to learn to reel back a little bit and be perhaps a bit more conscious of when he takes risks and in which situations it is or isn't viable for him. And I think that'll just be part of his progression in terms of also growing as a defensive forward, because we've seen quite a few nice flashes of Fantilli defensively, but it hasn't been overly consistent. I've definitely had some viewings where he's only been hyper focused on producing offense, and his line has suffered as a result because they've been basically playing shorthanded defensively. But in other games, he really does step up. So he's quite raw in some ways, and I find it interesting that throughout the draft year, quite a few media outlets were kind of framing Fantilli as like the safe bet. This is the big power forward that's going to be safe, and Bedard is like the massive swing on upside. And I don't agree. I think Fantilli is super skilled. I think his skill level is close to Mateychuk's. It's very, very close to it. And that said, there's also a bit of risk in his game. So while I do agree that he's basically a plug and play as a D+1, because I think he's just that good, I do think there will be some growing pains in terms of him adapting to the NHL. And that said, this is a player that could easily top out as a 100 plus point number 1 centerman. And I think the fact that Columbus was able to get him at 3rd overall is very good value.
Absolutely. And then we move on to David Jiricek, who by any means, I mean, on any other team would be their best prospect, right? I mean, we're talking about a player who has one of the best toolkits among defensemen. Just one of the most toolsy defensemen you'll find. I mean, his ability to move around the ice. Yes, his stride's a bit wonky and is still, kind of growing into his frame. But you take everything he does individually. His shot is high end. His playmaking ability is really good. His ability to activate, his understanding of offensive fluidity and motions in the offensive zone is really, really good. On top of that, he's a great rush defender because of his good footwork, because of his power, his raw power that he has on his frame. In his own zone, he's able to clear the net front. He's able to lay the body when he needs to. He does everything at a really good level. And to have Jiricek as your second best prospect in your pool, that really kind of makes the Columbus Blue Jackets a really promising prospect pool. And that's kind of what separates him from Chicago, in my opinion, is that what we did essentially is we had a lot of trouble separating these two teams. Essentially what we decided on was to break down their top 5s and to decide on which one we liked more. And we opted for the Columbus Blue Jackets because outside of Fantilli and Jiricek, that's not all they have. I mean, they've got a fantastic defenseman in Stanislav Svozil in their pool as well, who looks really interesting. Very fluid, but has also improved his offensive game by leaps and bounds in the WHL, to the point that, having watched him recently at the World Juniors for Slovakia, he looked like their best player. It was just absurd. And then you look at Denton Mateychuk, who's in that conversation as well, as a very chaotic but very fun defenseman who's able to do everything on the ice, who recovers his own dump-ins at times. I mean, he's all over the place, but in a very fun, very enjoyable way, and could be paired with a guy like Svozil long-term really well. And then we end things with one of our favorites from last year's draft, and Gavin Brindley in that top 5. I mean, talk me through Brindley, because I can talk about him at length, and we'd be here all day. So, yeah.
Yeah, Gavin Brindley had the best motor of any player in the entire 2023 draft class.
Absolutely.
He does not know how to play the game of hockey at less than 130%. He always gives it his all. And perhaps to a fault as well. I think like one of his clear weaknesses is that he needs to learn when to perhaps slow down, dial back a little bit. But this is a player who, beyond just being hyper intense, is very, very intelligent with how he uses his tools to create offensive opportunities. He is a very capable playmaker, and he uses his intensity and his pace and his speed. He's very quick, very agile, very good skater, and he uses all those tools collectively to create space for his teammates, to create gaps in defensive structures. And after he was paired with Adam Fantilli at 5-on-5 after the World Juniors, both of them really took off. I thought that is when Gavin Brindley's scoring really took a massive leap. But I thought that even before then, he was a top 12 caliber player in the NHL draft class. And I think the fact that Columbus was able to not only snatch him in the second round, but to keep him and Fantilli together is awesome value. And Brindley's also a very good defensive forward. He can do a lot of things very, very well. And in my view, is kind of the ultimate complementary player. Like, he's not going to be a primary offensive driver, but he doesn't need to be. He's going to play on a line where he makes the lives of his line mates so much easier and will allow elite players to be as elite as they possibly can.
Absolutely. And this is without even mentioning some of the guys that are left outside of the top 5. I mean, Will Whitelaw's looking really good, very quality, adaptable, and skillful player. Luca Pinelli, one of our favorites from last year's draft, the player that you scouted in depth. We both really like the goal scoring ability, the playmaking skill, and the intelligence. A bit of questions about projectability, but overall a really interesting project. Tyler Peddle, who they traded the last pick of the last year's draft for in order to pick up. That's looking like a decent addition. And then on top of that, some of the defensemen that they have. I mean, you're talking about Andrew Strathman, who for me was one of the toughest players to scout this year, because I felt like I was watching a different player every game with Strathman. Oftentimes I had to check the number on his back to make sure I was scouting the right player. But he's very interesting in terms of the tools that he brings. He really needs to bring up that consistency and kind of find his niche as a player. But if you develop him well, he looks really interesting. Aiden Hurschuk is looking interesting as well. Guillaume Richard. They have a really decent goalie in Daniil Tarasov, who just graduated, and one in Sergei Ivanov that I really like. I've been a fan of him for quite a while. And on top of that, you look at some other wingers that they have. They have one of the wonkiest wingers I've ever seen in Kirill Dolchenkov.
He's interesting.
He's massive and skillful, but so weird to watch.
He's a giraffe on skates, and he has some really interesting tools for sure. I think I can totally understand why he got drafted. But yeah, in terms of uniqueness as a prospect, he's up there. He's definitely interesting to watch. And one more name that we have to throw out there is Jordan Dumais. This is a player who has been contentious for sure in the scouting community, and I know that the two of us are not the scouts that are highest on his upside. However, this is a player who lit the QMJHL on fire, and while I still have concerns about just how he projects due to his game still being very restricted to the perimeter.
Not being the best skater.
He's not a great skater. I don't think he's like an elite IQ type of hockey player who just thinks the game 10 steps ahead of his opponents either. And I'm a little bit concerned just how he adapts to pro hockey. But he's proven everything he possibly can at the QMJHL level. It's just that the concerns I still have are ones that can only be addressed once he makes that jump to professional hockey. So at this point in time, I'm just pressing pause on developing my analyses on him because, again, he's one of the best QMJHL players, if not the best QMJHL player at the moment. And it's just a question of how does he translate, because he is exactly the style of player that brings a lot of question marks in terms of how he projects. But at his best, he is he is an elite playmaker who consistently makes his line mates better. And there have been nice flashes of him working well in really tight areas. So I'm curious to see how he does that at the pro level. And hopefully the skating can take a couple steps as well. And I think if it does, that would unlock quite a few doors for him too.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, that's it for our breakdown of the top 32. Now, we're going to round things out with a bit of kind of a recap, breaking down the teams that have set themselves up the best for the next few years and improving their prospect pool, and also the teams that are most likely to drop off the map after one or two of their prospects graduate this year. So we'll talk about it on this episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
Okay, so we just heard they had some very good things to say about the Blue Jackets. A lot of people have had a lot of good things to say about the Blue Jackets prospect pool. We've heard good things about Gavin Brindley, glowing things. There was tons that stood out to me there. First of all, the way that Sebastian talked about Gavin Brindley, I think just got me so fired up because that's also a player that we talked to on the show very recently. And it sounds like the Blue Jackets are getting a very good value with that 34th overall pick. Sebastian had him in the top 12. So that was the first thing that stuck out to me from all that was just said here. Is what was it to you that Hadi and Sebastian talked about that was like, whoa, that made your ears go off?
Yeah, I liked the Brindley talk a lot. It's no secret that we are also very high on Brindley, but it's always nice to get that validated by the guys that actually like do that part of hockey and aren't just like part-time prospect guys like me. I also liked what they had to say about Stanislav Svozil. Again, a guy that I'm really, really high on. Maybe won't get into the NHL this year, but he's going to probably do some really fun things in the AHL. And I think we'll probably get to see a very, very fun player there. What else did I like about them? Obviously, they talked about Adam Fantilli being 100-plus point player. I thought that was good and exciting, and I love that as well. And I love that they mentioned Jordan Demay at the end because I feel like he's a guy that Blue Jackets fans are really high on, and kind of like they said in the bit, he has kind of mixed opinions from a lot of different public and private, public and team scouts, I should say. Which is, they scout for different things. They do different rankings. I share some of their concerns about, projectability and things like that, but you can't deny being maybe the best player in the QMJHL. That probably makes him at least an NHLer.
Yeah, we are very excited about Jordan Dumais. There's no question about that. He's legit. I honestly, I really liked that part too. And some of the other players that they mentioned, they said David Jiricek. They kind of briefly touched on him, but they did admit that he is maybe just as exciting of a prospect as what they got in Adam Fantilli. They talked about Denton Mateychuk, who I often forget about, is a defenseman who will chase his own dump-ins. That just seems like a player that Torts, this doesn't matter, but that just seems like a player that Torts would have loved. A defenseman that chases dump-ins. Are you kidding me? That's awesome. And then, yeah, just more about what he said about Gavin Brindley, again, I thought was really, really cool. Just how he's maybe has the best motor in the 2023 draft class. So, yeah, we're excited about him. I'm honestly, I'll believe it when I see it kind of guy. I talk highly about these players, but at the end of the day, it is really nice to hear other people in media consider that the Blue Jackets have like a top 5 NHL prospect pool. Like I think everybody across all platforms would look at what the Blue Jackets have and admit that. And that's credit to what Jarmo's done on seasons where he's dealt away first round draft picks, second round draft picks. He's also gotten them back somehow. He's kept Columbus at a place where they can be constantly seeming to reload and making these rebuilds easier because of these prospect pools. So overall, very good thoughts on what they had to say over at NHL, Locked On NHL Prospects. I'm going to be tuning into that show a lot more because unless the Jackets get to Stanley Cup contender-ish this year, that's all I need to know is who's coming through the wire. But is there anybody they didn't mention that you were like, ooh, maybe
Yeah,
this
there's a
is
couple of
on
guys
the
that are going
radar?
to be suiting up for the Monsters this season and we've talked about them before in James Malatesta and Luca Del Belbaluz. Both, I'm really, really high on both of those guys. And I think it's going to be, I keep saying that it's going to be really fun to be a Monsters fan this season, and I stand by that. Looking at a lot of the Blue Jackets' most exciting prospects are going to be in the AHL this season, apart from like the ones that literally just got drafted. And Denton Mateychuk, who is going to be doing another season in the WHL because he's not quite old enough for the AHL yet. But apart from him and DeMay, like most of the exciting prospects are going to be in the AHL. So like pay attention to the Monsters this season, because that's where you're going to start to see these guys pop up. And if you have a strong start to your Monsters career and Blue Jackets get an injury at right wing, let's say, who are they going to look at? They're going to look at the guys that are going to be playing well in the Monsters, and they're going to be like, right, let's see what they're like in the NHL. So people talk about the AHL kind of as and this is something I've seen kind of on Twitter over the past couple of days. I don't know if other people have seen it as well, but people seem to have this idea that the AHL is only for developing your prospect and you shouldn't care about it except in that way. And then I think about all of the great like San Jose Barracuda fans that I met, not Sharks fans. They're Barracuda fans first, you know, and they don't really pay attention to the Sharks. I see it all the time with like major junior hockey as well. You get people that are specifically like Halifax Moosehead fans. They're not NHL fans necessarily. And so I guess this all comes down to is the same thing I say every time we bring up the Monsters, which is they're like 2 hours down the highway. Go and watch the Monsters. They're going to rule this season if they get decent goaltending from Jet Greaves. It's gonna be a lot of fun. Support AHL hockey. It's not just a stepping stone to the NHL. It is kind of its own thing.
And Cleveland's always a fun time too. Come on, man. Like people hate on Cleveland, but it's cheaper than some of your bigger cities, and it's right there on a beautiful lake. Lake Erie is awesome. So, and the Monsters are going to have new uniforms this year. They play in a great arena. So definitely check out Monsters games. I know I will be at Monsters games because I want to see some Hunter McCown. I think this guy had I think he had a really, really solid 12 games with the Blue Jackets last year. He only logged 2 assists, but I felt like the playing time that he got, he made a lot with every single shift and wasn't afraid of the moment. Again, could be, as Jay and I talk about, just one of those guys going extra hard in March and April, and it sticks out than some of the other guys who have been playing 40 or 50 games. But I like Hunter McCown. Keep an eye on him. That's all we have for you guys today. Tomorrow, we are pulling out the Rick Sanchez portal gun, doing a little interdimensional travel as we discuss the 3 biggest what-ifs in CBJ franchise history. Thank you guys for listening to today's episode. Thank you for making this your first listen every day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms, YouTube, and the SiriusXM app. I've been Hayden Heilshorn. You can find me on Twitter at HaydenH971. You can find Jay on Twitter at _JAKOBFORSTER. You can also find the show on Twitter at LO_Blue Jackets. You can email us, lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening, and until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.